And so when we think starting out in space a little bit, satellite is something that has greatly improved over the last several years and most recently in the past year. But we have two types, and one is that the more traditional satellite, which is geosynchronous. Very few satellites are overhead, but they stay immediately above essentially your house, but 20,000 miles out into space. And that's we've heard about Wild Blue or HughesNet, and this is a technology that they use. The biggest issue with the satellite, this type of satellite, is really the high latency or delay. It takes a half a second or up to a second to the signal to go up to that satellite and then back down. And so if you try and use satellite for a Zoom call or so on, many times it's more like talking on a two-way radio. The speeds max out usually at about the minimum of 25 down and 3 up, which is meets the FCC standard. And so that, for people who don't have a wired internet choice or any other choice, this satellite service can actually be effective for them. But they're also limited by relatively low data caps. People are very excited now about Starlink, which is a low Earth orbit satellite internet service. Many satellites crossing the sky, thousands of them actually now up in space. Because they're only about 350 miles above the Earth, their latency, their delay is much lower. One of the big issues with the low Earth satellite is the variability in both the latency and the speeds. As those satellites kind of come into view and leave your view, those both vary quite a bit. Average speeds up to 100 megabits down and 14 megabits up, which is for, again, people who are in the rural countryside with not many choices, that can be a very good plan for a family. Right now, there's no data caps on that program. Fixed wireless is what we have in many rural places. It works exceedingly well out on the prairie in agricultural communities in particular, where towns are relatively close together. And so there's every 7 miles along the old railroad tracks, there could be a nice water tower or grain elevator to put radios on top of. When those towers are fed by fiber optics, you can receive service of 100 megabits by 50 megabits. That again is a high quality connection. Once you get into the more valley areas or in the North Woods, the fixed wireless service begins to serve fewer and fewer people, the smaller percentage of the population, due to the fact that people can't really see the radio. It really requires a line of sight, so your house to see that tower. We also know that speeds drop with distance. And so that's why traditional ag communities on the prairie that are relatively close together, where these networks work much better. Sometimes providers, if they only have limited places to get connectivity, they might use what they call hops between towers to send the backbone signal. They don't use fiber optic to connect the towers, so they use the wireless services themselves. And that can really slow the speeds and adds latency, that delay. And so as you get farther and farther from kind of the network central location, the services get worse and worse. Some key factors, I mentioned line of sight requirements, but also what the real question is, what spectrum are you using? What radio waves, what frequencies? And the highest frequencies that's now in 5G, those can only go a very short distance. The more mid-range technology spectrums can go 7 to 10 miles out into the countryside. So a big difference there between the licensed and unlicensed. Things like Wi-Fi spectrum, those are unlicensed. So anyone can really make use of it. It also adds to then congestion on those networks, and they might not work as well. But in many rural places, there aren't that many users of that wireless spectrum, and so it works out okay. One emerging trend is the T-Mobile and other cellular companies now kind of offering a home internet service. T-Mobile markets theirs as 5G for home, and that they use the mid-range spectrum, and so they're talking about up to 100 megabits per second with those services, and that's another kind of game changer for places that have good cellular service. If your cell service is not very good, this service won't work for you either. There's new spectrum that the FCC has enabled that's been traditionally used for citizens band radio, CBRS. And that's kind of a shared system where different users have different priorities. And that's another opportunity for some decent service. A lot of times we have seen that now in communities. Schools own some of that spectrum, and they're using that to serve their students out in the community.